Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the continuation of the City of Waterloo Council meeting of Monday, October 28th, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. First off, I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. And I think there's a lot of ways we can rectify the past and figure out a way forward, particularly with our schools here that have such great Indigenous outreach programs. It makes us much more of a powerhouse. Disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Seeing none. Moving into staff reports, the first one is the 2019 Waterloo Awards for 2019. And our first agenda item is the presentation of the Waterloo Award to outstanding contributors in our community. I am pleased to welcome this evening's honorees, David Marskell and Eric Davis. Thank you for joining us in council chambers and this evening, along with your families, friends, and nomination supporters. I look forward to presenting Eric and David with the Waterloo Award. The Waterloo Award is the City of Waterloo's most prestigious civic honor. Since 1997, this unique award has been presented to a select group of just 51 recipients. The Waterloo Award is presented each year to individuals who embody a spirit of creativity and collaboration, who demonstrate leadership and innovative thinking, people who find new and inventive ways to improve our community. Nominations for the Waterloo Award are solicited each year from the general public and from city staff. A committee of citizens then reviews the applicants and makes recommendations of the honorees to City Council. On behalf of me and my council, it is my pleasure to present the Waterloo Award this evening to two exceptional individuals whose personal and collaborative efforts have enhanced the quality of life for our city and beyond. Their contributions have assisted in making Waterloo the strong, vibrant city it is today. I will meet with our 2019 Waterloo Award recipients individually to present their award, pins, and certificates. And I'll call on Councillor Freeman to take it from here.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. Each year, the City of Waterloo celebrates citizens selected to receive the Waterloo Award by presenting them with a unique pin, individually designed and handcrafted by Waterloo artist Aggie Bainan. These distinctive Waterloo Award pins, made with semi-precious and precious metals, are given as a visual symbol of civic recognition. The pins can be worn proudly by their recipients for a lifetime. The names of the Waterloo Award recipients are also engraved on plaques that hang in these council chambers. I would like to invite Mayor Jaworski and our first award recipient, David Marskell, to stand in the council horseshoe now before his profile is read and the Waterloo Award presented. Anyone wishing to take photographs of the award presentations can come forward after the citation has been read. David Marskell is a community builder who continually looks for opportunities to bring the world to Waterloo. Through his years of hard work and dedication as the CEO of the museum, he has had a huge impact on the well-being of our community through the numerous world-class exhibitions he has brought here for all to see. He believes in inclusivity and chooses shows and exhibits that are thought-provoking and innovative. The museum draws visitors from all over the world and has a significant positive financial, social, cultural, and artistic impact on Waterloo region. He collaborates with all sectors of the community and is well known for thinking outside the box and encouraging others to do the same. In the words of David Marskell's nominator, Brenda Halloran, David encourages this community to be the best it can be. He generously offers help and support where needed and when asked. He never says no, but always finds a way to say yes and to help. He supports the art scene, he promotes musicians, he helps our nonprofits, he provides support to schools, children, families. His reach and love and kindness for this community is well known, and he is respected by everyone he works with. David is also a strong supporter of the environment, as well as local organizations that he volunteers with, such as baseball. David has played a significant role in the region's bid to secure the Canada Summer Games. He supports tourism and often participates on community panels and discussions around arts and culture and engaging more people. David is also a strong voice and advocate for government funding for arts and culture. He is an ambassador and champion for volunteerism and for promoting our community far and wide. It's an honor to present the 2019 Waterloo Award to David Marskell.
A few words, okay.
I better sit down.
For those of you who know me, I'm not that shy, but I'm also not that humble, but I'm very humbled this evening. I want to congratulate Eric, a very deserving recipient tonight, and also to thank Brenda Holleran and all of those who have supported this acknowledgement. Growing up with two Baptist ministers as parents, actually three because my mother remarried at 86, being put on a pedestal was not fun. When I got caught trying to learn how to smoke cigarettes out behind the church at the age of 12, I got in more trouble than the others. But everybody appreciates a pat on the back, and I appreciate this sincerely tonight. It tells me I'm on the right track and doing good things for the community. I'm not sure how much the check is worth that comes with this. I'll have to check in there later. It's in the mail. But I do want to share this award most sincerely with my family who are with me tonight. Certainly the museum board represented by Linda Faby tonight and Caitlin Dietrich representing our staff. And I share that with them sincerely as well. But I also want to share it with this council. In 2 days, I'll celebrate 13 years at the museum. And it was a very cold January evening when I first came to my first council meeting in the region, and it was here. And Diane was here, and Angela was here. And I said, I don't know if I can save the Children's Museum, but I have a vision. Please help me. And you did. I'll never forget that. In a week or two, along with Tracy from the Uptown BIA, we'll be announcing something new very close to this building. And I'm very excited about that collaboration and to be able to work here in Waterloo. So please stay tuned for that. So we've kind of come full circle. You've supported me, and I've done things that I think you're acknowledging tonight that are good. And now I look forward to the future to do more collaborative works with you, and I sincerely thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations, David. I now invite Eric Davis to join Mayor Jaworski in the council horseshoe. Eric Davis grew up in Waterloo, and for decades he's been involved in the community in various ways. His community involvement is extensive, and he has greatly improved our community, especially considering the significant leadership roles he has held with some very well-established community organizations, such as Canadian Mental Health Association, the United Way, and the Rotary Club of Waterloo. Eric has also been involved with many more organizations, including the City of Waterloo's Municipal Heritage Committee, Connect, the Innovation Corridor Secretariat, the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, Canadian Diabetes Association, Sustainable Waterloo Region, Wilfrid Laurier Students Union, the Records Community Editorial Board. According to Eric's nominator, Susan Tunstall, when Eric gets involved with an organization, he does not get involved partway. He gives it his all, and it shows. Eric is a partner with Miller Thompson LLP in Waterloo. Specializing in municipal and planning law, he acts for a number of municipalities and other public bodies in southwestern Ontario. Eric, through his profession, benefits the Waterloo community as he continually advocates for our region at the Ontario Bar Association, and his representation of his clients locally, whether public or private entities, ensures that all voices are heard and important issues are considered from a variety of perspectives. In 2012, Eric received the IMLA Canadian Scholarship and presented a paper at its annual conference that year in Austin, Texas. Eric has been extensively involved in politics since high school and is probably best known as the provincial Liberal candidate for Kitchener-Waterloo in the 2011 general election and the 2012 by-election, which further demonstrates his level of community involvement. Eric has been the recipient of many awards, including one of Waterloo Region's Top 40 Under 40 by The Record in 2011, the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012, the Outstanding Leadership Award by Rotary Waterloo, and a Paul Harris Fellowship by Rotary Waterloo in 2017. It is a pleasure to present the 2019 Waterloo Award to Eric Davis.
So I'll start off by saying that it's always dangerous to allow a lawyer to say a few words, but I'll try to keep it brief. So firstly, I would like to thank City Council for honoring me with this prestigious award. I think it's important for people to know that as involved as I try to be in our community, we recognize and respect the high level of involvement those at the council table. As city councilors, it is often your role to thank others, but I would like to express my sincere thanks to all of you for your commitment to public service. I would also like to thank my very supportive wife, Cynthia, without whom I would not be able to do everything that I try to do in our community. With my wife and I both being lawyers in Waterloo Region and both being heavily involved, it can sometimes be challenging to balance our schedules. And I can assure you that my wife is far more impressive than I. However, with her continued love and support, I'm able to try to give back as best I can. Also, I would like to thank my girls, Isabella and Victoria, for understanding that sometimes I have to be away in the evenings and that I can't always pick them up from school or daycare or put them to bed, but hopefully we're slowly instilling in them the importance of giving back to one's community, that it is, in fact, our responsibility to give back if we're able to, and to help those in need. Further, thank you to my parents, who are here this evening, for encouraging me to give back, despite it also being a convenient excuse to get me out of the house. They have both taught me the importance of hard work and ensuring that you should leave things better off than how you found them. I would also be remiss if I did not thank my nominator, Simon Tunstall, who is my best friend and supporter, as well as those who submitted letters of support for me, namely John Wall, Frank Benzik, and Lindsay Markle. I greatly appreciate and respect all of them, and it is so meaningful for me to have received their support. And finally, I would like to congratulate David Marskell, whose accomplishments I most certainly cannot match, but I received this award not as a job well done, but as a you've done a good job so far. I will try my best to continue to give back to the city I love so dearly, and to ensure that I'm one day as worthy of receiving the award as he is. So thank you all very much.
Good job, Daddy. For those watching on YouTube, Victoria just said, "Good job, Daddy." So good. And he does do a good job, Isabel and Victoria, because he helps out on our State of the City address. And thank you so much for helping out the city on that through Rotary Waterloo. Through that, we were able to increase the annual fundraising substantially. I think we did $60,000 so far in the first 4 years. And we were also able to introduce Hospice Waterloo Region to the community, which a year later we were able to announce a $1 million donation. Was it $1 million? $1 donation. So, well done. Thank you for what you do with Rotary Waterloo, and I'm sorry I've missed so many meetings. I'll make them up later. Thank you everyone who joined us at council this evening for the Waterloo 2019 Waterloo Award presentations. On behalf of me and council, I again congratulate our 2 Waterloo Award 2019 recipients. I invite our honored guests to exit council chambers soon, along with anyone who came to council this evening for the Waterloo Award presentations. You are welcome downstairs in the atrium, where you can pick up a program as well as a bookmark while you're there for the reception. Please enjoy the rest of your evening while our riveting meeting continues. Thank you all very much. Oh, moved by Councillor Freeman, seconded by Councillor Henry. All those in favor? There, it's official. Thank you. Good catch.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Victoria. Maybe she can stay here. Item B on our agenda, Parkview Crematorium, the future considerations. Report prepared by Jeff Silcox-Childs, Susan Bolt, with a presentation by Jeff tonight. Oh, okay. Come on up. Normally, financial analysts provide all the moral support to keep the presenter going. So
I need more support than that.
good. Okay, we picked a good one to help you out tonight.
I'll try to make it riveting, but no guarantees. All right. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. In April of this year, council directed staff to undertake a public engagement process to explore 2 options for the Parkview Crematorium. Tonight, Susan and I will be providing you with a brief presentation, reviewing the background, the options explored, the feedback received, and finally the staff recommendation. The building itself, as a reminder, was opened in 1977. It is a 2-level structure. The upper level shown here is accessible from the front of the building, and the lower level is accessible from the back. The upper level contains the chapel, washrooms, and 164 interior niche spaces for cremated remains, which are shown here on the right. The lower level includes the garage access for deliveries, shown on the left, the 2 retorts on the right, and for those of you who aren't necessarily aware, the retorts are the burner part of the crematorium, and a cooler, a work area, as well as storage. The equipment, which has been operational in excess of 40 years, has exceeded its useful life expectancy and is in need of replacement. As per the Funeral, Burial, Cremation Services Act, which is formerly known as the Cemeteries Act, the city will always be in the cemetery business. However, legislation changed in 2012, opening up the privatization of crematorium services. Since that time, 26 new crematoriums have opened across Ontario. Parkview has seen the loss of 10 funeral homes to private industry since the legislation changed. We currently complete approximately 1,300 cremations per year and estimate that 40% of these are from within the local community. This year, even with the uncertainty around the crematorium, our numbers are up by approximately 40 units. Within the marketplace, the demand for cremation is continuing to rise as more people are choosing this option for themselves and for their loved ones. Initially, 2 options were being considered as we started the public engagement process. These included option 1, closure of the crematorium and repurpose upper and lower levels to interior niche space, and option 2, expand existing building, replace the retorts and cooler, and continue cremation services. The public engagement process utilized the Engage Waterloo platform, which was made available from April 23rd to September the 4th. Approximately 50 people visited the site. Feedback was largely inconclusive, with the same percentage of people supporting closure compared with those who supported reinvestment and continuation of the business. A PIC was held at the crematorium, at the chapel site actually, on June 27th. Both residents and funeral home representatives attended. Feedback from the local residents supported keeping the crematorium. I knew I was going to screw up on that word. It's too close to Halloween. Keeping the crematorium, with specific concerns around their prepaid arrangements. Funeral home providers also expressed support to keep the crematorium and specifically referenced their appreciation of the exceptional staff and customer service provided by Parkview. Both groups encouraged a scaled-down version of the building expansion to focus primarily on equipment replacement. And lastly, through direct consultation with our funeral home providers, the feedback confirmed the general sentiment was Parkview meets our needs. They appreciated the exceptional professionalism, care, and customer service provided by our staff, and all supported a scaled-down investment approach. Sorry, I got a little bit of a runny nose. Through the public engagement process, it became clear that three options needed to be considered. The original closure and repurpose to interior niche option remains unchanged. The expand existing building, replace retorts and cooler option was reduced in scale, limiting works to within the existing building envelope. And a third option was added to consider a third-party operating lease agreement through an RFP process. And Susan will walk us through those financial models now.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Under option 1, the capital requirement is to close the crematorium and to repurpose the chapel building with inside niche space. And it's estimated at about $700,000 out of the total capital need of $1.183 million. And that also includes roadway resurfacing, additional columbarium features, and fencing around the equipment shed. So it's not just limited to the crematorium itself. The current cemetery reserve is over $1.2 million, and this can fully fund the capital needs to repurpose. However, a portion will be required to fund the other capital projects. With the added availability of inside niche space, there is an expected increase in niche sales. However, faced with the loss of cremation revenues, the cemetery will require tax-based support starting in 2022 and onwards. This need for tax-based support can be alleviated with a one-time tax increase in 2022 of about 0.46%. This amount will provide enough operational funding to support the cemetery and crematorium, which should again start turning a profit by 2027. By closing the crematorium, however, in 2020, there will be a reduction in full-time crematorium operator, which we will be able to absorb through attrition. The total tax-based support that will be required from 2022 to 2026 is estimated to be just over $1 million. Once the cemetery starts to turn a profit, it is estimated that the reserve balance will be about $800,000 come 2030. The capital requirement to replace the cooler and retorts in order to continue to provide cremation services is estimated at $1 million now for option 2. Additional capital needs, as previously mentioned, would be about another $682,000. All capital costs can be funded from the existing cemetery reserve as they are required. Even when factoring in the downtime to replace the retorts, the reserve is expected to remain healthy. The continued revenues from the cremation operations will also allow us to fund an additional full-time operator in order to meet the customer service needs for extended hours of operations and provide for additional staff hours to meet the growing sales needs of our cemetery. As the new retorts are more efficient, they will provide some minor decreases in other operational costs, such as natural gas and electricity, reduce our emissions, and reduce maintenance and service costs. As the city continues to remain in the cremation business, the option will not have the need for tax-based support. An estimated reserve balance will be anticipated in 2030 of about $1.6 million. It should be noted that this option, we have made every effort to provide reasonable assumptions on the number of cremation amounts, but these are not guaranteed, and the revenues may vary slightly. Option 3 will require the city to issue an RFP for a third-party operator to take over the crematorium business. Under this option, the city's capital requirements will be limited to only that which impacts the cemetery, such as road surfacing and fencing. The capital requirement to do the retort replacement will be the responsibility of the lessee. The assumptions under this option, the city would close the crematorium in 2020 and lease the space to a third-party operator to run the crematorium. The city would then expect to receive lease revenue from the crematorium space, as well as a percentage of revenues from the crematorium operations by the leasee. With the loss of the full crematorium revenues, the cemetery will draw down on the existing reserve and will require tax-based support starting in 2026 until about 2029, after which time we may again start to realize a modest profit. A one-time tax increase in 2026 of 0.12% will help to start to rebuild the reserve by 2027. By no longer operating the crematorium ourselves, there will be a reduction of one full-time operator in 2020. As the city will only receive a percentage of cremation revenues and lease costs, this option will require of $105,000 tax-based support. The reserve balance will initially be depleted and will slowly rebuild and is estimated to be at about $140,000 by 2030.
All right. So after reviewing the public engagement and the financial modeling, staff recommend that the city proceed with option 2. Replacement of the crematorium equipment, maintain the existing building footprint, and continue to operate the crematorium. Option 2 represents the greatest capital investment at $1.682 million, which includes $1 million to replace the crematorium equipment. No tax-based support is required, and the cemetery reserve is estimated to be $1.6 million by 2030. And again, that's an estimate. To accommodate the extended hours of operation, 1.5 FTE would be required, and this has been included in the modeling. The new retorts would be more efficient than the existing, resulting in significant reduction in emissions output. Approximately $1.9 million in prepaids held in trust would remain with the city. And Parkview will continue to provide a valued, affordable cremation option to local and surrounding communities. In terms of next steps, there is some time sensitivity to consider. Our customers, funeral home providers, and our staff have been awaiting a decision for quite some time. The HVAC repairs need to be undertaken immediately, and given the age and grandfathered status of the existing retorts, the planning, approvals, and procurement processes for their replacements need to commence as soon as possible. I'm going to stray from the presentation just for a moment, if you'll entertain me, before I wrap up. You've been hearing a lot of numbers and statistics and forecast, and those are certainly a big part of this story. But I don't want to lose sight of the human connection. These are people. These are members of our communities, our families. These are loved ones. What Parkview does is not simply a business. We interact with and we help people at their most emotional and vulnerable times. And I also want to recognize and thank our staff for their compassion and their commitment to serving our customers. That concludes our presentation, and Susan and I are available for any questions.
Wonderful wrap up there, Jeff, and thank you, Susan. That was a question on my mind. We see 1.9 million in trust. How many families does that represent? Like, how many cremations is that? That seems like a large number, it seems.
Yeah, through the chair, that represents approximately 3,500 people.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. We do have 2 delegations here tonight, but if anybody has questions of staff right now, Councilor Bonagor, please go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I just was wondering, when you're looking at option 2, which looks, you've got some great options in front of us. When you talk about extending hours in order to, it sounds like we're trying to compete with the private sector. Is that where the demand is coming from? Like, are we in competition with the private sector when it comes to Parkview?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, that's essentially it. So we are in a private realm now. Cremation services were privatized in 2012, and that's who we are competing with. Now, in terms of extended hours, we're not looking at running full extended shifts. It's basically a 7 a.m. or actually 8 a.m. to like 6 p.m. operations, 6 days a week. And we've consulted with our funeral home providers, and we feel that that's a reasonable amount of time that they need.
I suppose that question is really coming from, do we want to be operating as essentially a private operator, or are we going to be sort of an additional option that's not trying to meet the same level? So the question of whether to extend the hours, where do you see the benefit for the city in modelling ourselves after the private sector there?
Right. Through the chair to the councillor, I see the benefit in we need to meet our funeral home providers' needs, and their needs are coming directly from the families that they serve. And people are looking for faster turnaround times. They expect to have cremations done quickly. They expect those to be at services that are held fairly quickly. And so to meet those needs, that's why we're looking at those extended hours. In terms of anything beyond the regular scheduled Monday through Saturday work week, anything beyond that would be at an additional cost.
Okay, thank you very much. And we do have two delegations. Oh, Royce, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor
Councilor Bodley, go ahead.
You can call me Royce, that's okay. Through you, Dave. Thank you guys, Jeff and Susan. I appreciate this. I know we had a lot of feedback at the PIC from some of our smaller funeral home providers that perhaps we didn't hear a lot from prior to the first meeting that we had here. So I appreciate the new options that have been placed in front of us. I really think that these are taking into consideration a lot of what we heard at that PIC, and I appreciate that there's a number of these funeral home providers here today. The question I have is, obviously, I appreciate the sentiment that you stated there at the end around what service we provide to our community. But at the end of the day, obviously, there's still a business element to this. So how confident are we in the revenue numbers? I know that you had mentioned, Susan, that obviously we're competing in a marketplace, and to Councillor Boniger's point, we're competing with the private sector in this. But in the very first meeting that we had heard, it was a little doom and gloom, if I can say, about the cemetery business in terms of the numbers. And is really the revenue projections that we're seeing here today, based on conversations we've had with some of the people that are in the audience today, what sort of shifted the tide in that regard?
Through the mayor to the councillor, we've taken a look at various scenarios, and we've also had some discussion with our funeral home providers. They are definitely looking to us as providing an exceptional service. And during the public engagement, it was apparent that Waterloo provided exceptional service. And that's what they come to appreciate with us, and they plan to remain with us. So we've had more of a verbal commitment from them that they come to us because of the service, and they want to stay with us because of that service.
I appreciate that, and that's certainly what I heard at the PIC as well, too, so I appreciate those comments. However, I guess my question is around the risk. Is there in your revenue modeling, is there any scenario in which there's a significant drop from a funeral home provider or a number of funeral home providers? Or is it that because we're talking about a spread over a number of funeral home providers that the risk is lessened? Maybe if you could speak to the risk a little bit, I would appreciate that. Okay,
I have done a little bit of risk analysis on it, and we've taken into account approximately a 18% decline the first year, and that would be in addition to like closing the crematorium for the short period of doing the install. What I found that even if I increased that to 25% and had modest increase back once we get the new retorts up and running, we would still be in a positive position. And I have used rough estimates from Lee's report, which was a report that said what the cremation business is looking to be. They have indicated a 2% increase in cremations over each year. I have used roughly 1.2%. So I have used that as a factor to include the risk of either smaller communities closing, not being able to compete in the business, or losing customer base. I trust that answers or helps.
Very much so, appreciate that. And then one last question through you, Mayor Jaworski, is it appears that in this business, really the biggest impact to us was outside legislative pressure. And I guess my question, and this is difficult to predict the future, but is there any discussion around any further outside pressures from a legislative perspective that may be an additional risk when we're investing such a significant amount of money up front here? Is there any legislative pressure that we are aware of or discussion within the industry that, say, 5 years from now, we could be in a situation where we're again seeing a significant drop in revenue due to outside legislative issues beyond our control?
Through the chair to the councillor, I certainly wish I could predict the future, as we all do. There is risk. There's risk in everything. We're not aware of any pending legislative changes coming forward. It's certainly something we have discussed in detail. The privatization of the cremation market took place in 2012. Significant changes have happened since that time. Should the government look at the market now and decide to make changes in terms of perhaps taxing or what have you, that could happen. And again, through our discussions with the BAO and our colleagues, we're not aware of anything at this time.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you. And I will invite up our delegates. First up, Stuart McPhail, Funeral Director, Grey Bruce Cremation Burial Services. Welcome, Stuart, and thank you for making the trip here to Waterloo.
Thanks for having me. Good evening. My name is Stuart McPhail, owner of Grey Bruce Cremation and Burial Services in Owen Sound. I am in full support of option 2, replace cooler and retort and continue providing cremation. What do funeral providers, funeral home directors want to use Parkview Crematorium? Excellent customer service in office and crematorium. Can get cremated remains back in a timely manner. Neutral ownership, city ownership. Hours of operation, 8 to 4, 6 days a week. It's a nice chapel for services. It holds prepaid cremation fees. I think they've got about 3,500 in there right now. And they do cremation witnessings. So there's a lot of things that Parkview does do for the public and families. Funeral providers, funeral directors come from many communities. They are from Waterloo, Kitchener, Elmira, Arthur, Palmerston, Drayton, Listowel, Harriston, Wingham, Hanover, Owen Sound, and others. My commitment to the city, Parkview, is 100%. I will not take my cremations to another crematorium, and others are doing the same. I would like to thank Jeff, Susan, and others for the cremation review. 1,341 cremations last year, 1,115 this year. This is commitment. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Stuart, for coming all the way down here. I know we're not exactly your next door neighbor, but when we spoke at Bryce Krause's retirement, it was just although he's speaking here in public, it was at Bryce's retirement where we spoke for quite some time over the, how good the team was at our cemetery. So thank you very much for all those accolades for the team, and thank you for the input on this. Questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, I'd like to invite Susan Coswin up here on the Good Green Death Project. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Okay, the right button is this one? Okay, excellent. Okay. Thank you, Mayor Jaworski and Council. It's been a while since I've been here. But Waterloo, to me, has always been a leader in a lot of environmental issues. We held the Dandelion Festival here, we got funding from here, and you have green burial sites, so, you've been doing a good job. So I want to encourage you to do even better, which is why I'm bringing the Good Green Death Project to the city here. So our vision really is to make our last act on Earth regenerative and sustainable. People don't think about the environmental impact of their, after they die, what happens. So what is a Good Green Death Project? Essentially, you die, we take the body and we compost the body. It's called natural organic reduction or recomposition or above ground decomposition. And what we want to do is be able to take the resulting soil from being composted and use it to plant trees, which will become forests. So what problems are we trying to solve? Right now we're running out of space, and it's getting to be very expensive for people to buy grave sites. We need to meet the future need of people in our community, and we're looking at, I think, about 2030 when we're going to have sort of the peak of the boomer deaths. We have to think about the resources that are being used right now with our current practices for burial. We use exotic woods, we use caskets, we use metals. Often there's embalming fluids. We have to have markers, and often there's concrete liners for the grave site. And if we have to think about the environmental impact. So every time we cremate someone, we're using fossil fuels. And so we have to decarbonize, I guess is the word, our death and dying practices. We have to think about climate change and what kind of impact we're having with our death and dying practices and meet future community needs. So what I'd like to see happen is that we have a forest cemetery created somewhere. And Waterloo would be a great place to do that. We need to establish a natural organic reduction facility. And what I'd like to see is that the cost of the service to be composted would include a donation to a land trust. I'd like to see a land trust hold a conservation easement on this property so the forest is protected forever. There's some examples of this in Germany. They have something called Friedwalds, and they have 20 of them in Germany. And so what they do there is that they have a protected forest. You can buy a particular spot under a tree, and your cremated remains would go there. But I want to do one step better and put composted remains there to be either scattered or to plant new trees on the same property. I did a presentation to a Mennonite congregation in Hanover, and we were talking about if the first person dies, they could be used to plant a tree, and then remaining members of the family could be scattered around there. And he said, it's a family tree. And I just love that. So we want to look to the future and how we can do things better than what we're doing now. I'd like to see a partnership happen because this needs to be something for the community. In a sense, I want to decorporatize the funeral business, and I want to bring it back to the people. As midwives, brought birthing away from the medical establishment, we need more death doulas, home funerals, and our death and dying practices to be back to the people. I want to see the municipality manage the cemetery. We have a letter of support from RARE to hold a land trust. The existing funeral home could even be a co-op that people could buy into. And so what I'm working on is to legalize recomposition or natural organic reduction at the province, to build public support, which is doing really well, and to catalyze the building of a facility or the renovation of existing facilities, which could be Parkview Cemetery. 2 years ago, when we first started working on this project, we paid for a survey of 1,500 people in Ontario. It was done by Oracle Poll to ask people if they supported a change in legislation to do this. And this is before we did anything. And to me, 57% overall to start without doing any kind of education, I thought was really important. Millennials were all over this. Older people, not so much, but you still see the age range, 36 to 51. We still have 72% support. The only place in the world right now that has legalized natural organic reduction is in Washington State, and that just happened this year. And it becomes effective next year. So the company, it's a social enterprise, which the Good Green Death Project will be either a nonprofit or a social enterprise. The their whole goal was, well, they were the ones that got the legislation in place. So they're working at opening next year to be the first facility in the world to actually allow this. They're kind of excited there when they got the news. This is Katrina Spade on the bottom, like that. She's the founder of all this. I met her 2 years ago to talk about how we could make it happen here. So Washington State University, that's Katrina and Dr. Lynn Carpenter Boggs. I just kind of put their picture in there. But this is the actual unit that they used to test at the Washington State University. So the body is placed in there with natural materials like wood chips, and it's accelerated decomposition. Nothing is added. It's the natural process. It takes about 30 days to create soil. And this is a vision of what the facility they would like to see. So each one of these is a body would be placed in them, their individual units. And it's just kind of a nice place to be. So people could come in, the family could come in once a week and turn the composter. So, it gives breathing time between the death and when you're going to, to commemorate, the person's life. So I saw this in the pit and I just thought this was so cute, right? This is what ours is going to look like. Okay, it's not. Okay. So I think you have a good idea of the current regulatory landscape right now. We have met with the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. We've met with Carrie Smith with the Bereavement Authority. So it's just ongoing communications with them. There will have to be some environmental assessments because Carrie's main concerns are public and environmental health. There may be some restrictions. We have information from the states that composting would not be good for someone who has mad cow disease or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Okay, so that will probably be an exception to this particular process. So there's a lot of benefits to this. This is the thing that has always got me. It saves 1 metric ton per body compared to cremation and burial. I think, we have to do everything we can to reduce our carbon, footprint. So I think this is significant based on the number of bodies you're talking about every year. We're creating more forests, so it's working in tandem to improve our environment, and it's cross-sectoral. So it's land use, it's funerals, whatever. Project status. As I said, ongoing communication. We've built our volunteer team. Thanks to Councillor Jan Vesic, she connected me with SS Ahmad, who is helping us write our business plan, which is wonderful. We're exploring the idea of doing human trials in Ontario. I pitched this twice to the Eco Market and KW Awesome this year and got first prize both times, which is nice. Business plan is in progress, and we were just at a Modern Death Expo and with about 300 people, and we had tremendous support. I got sort of pages of people who are really interested in this as an option. Even, can I donate my body for this? So it's kind of cool. So you're aware of the regulations, so I won't go through, but we want to be #1 in Canada and #2 in the world, and it should be in Waterloo. So really what I'm asking of you is to keep the door open for this, because to me, this is when, not if it's going to happen, because Angela, you know me. I got to make this happen. And that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan, and I will ask staff to comment, but any questions for Susan before she leaves the podium? Thank you, Susan. I'll ask Jeff Silcox-Childs to comment on this. I know you've done some investigation into this, and it made me think that we have a green roof here. Maybe we could make it even greener. Go ahead, Jeff.
Should I sit down or stay standing?
We're done. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Susan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, lots of opportunities, green roofs, boulevards. No, I'm kidding. It's a fascinating idea for sure, and it's one that is sort of just getting off the ground, and we will definitely be keeping a close eye on it as it develops. I would say similar to what Susan and I have done for the crematorium, we would look at a very wholesome business approach. Legislatively, once the BAO approvals and everything and all that is in place, what are the capital costs? What's involved? What sort of space requirements are required? I'm surprised by the 30 days. That's amazing. And then at that point, we also would need to look at the compost being produced. Is it still considered human remains? And if that is the case, it needs to be kept within a cemetery. So a forest type setting could certainly happen within cemetery grounds. We actually have one. So we will continue to watch this and continue to monitor. And kudos to you for all your efforts, and I wish you well.
Thank you much, Jeff. And with that, that's all the delegations for this item. Do I see anything from council? No questions of council, from council? Anyone wish to move this? Councillor Henry does. Oh, okay. Councillor Henry, Councillor Bodley. Comments from anyone? Councillor Henry.
I think the last time we were here talking about this project, it was an FSP meeting, so I was in the chair. So I appreciate the opportunity to do this full circle. Comments I remember making at that time were very similar, Jeff, to how you ended your presentation. And we've heard that from some of the funeral home operators here. We provide excellent service. We provide caring service, and we have staff that are second to none in terms of their ability to do that. And the council was challenged, and the community was challenged by the options that we had before us, and the difficulty of meeting those. So I think it's been very useful to have this process and engagement with homes to understand exactly what is needed to be able to keep this going. And I'm so pleased that we're in a place today where we have an option to continue this important service for the community that's holding prices down, that allows our staff to engage with people in their times of need and difficulty in the way that they are very capable of doing so, and to do so in a sustainable, fiscally sustainable manner. And we'll see what comes down the road for other kinds of sustainability. But at the moment, I think this is great, and I want to commend staff and the community for really working on finding a way to keep this going in a way that we can sustain in the long run.
Councillor Bonagor, for sure.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, and just to kind of carry on from Councillor Henry's comments there, as someone who got unfortunately introduced to the cremation world this year with the passing of one of my parents, I know it's extremely difficult. That the families are in a difficult time, and I think the fact that the city is able to provide a cost-effective place that's focused on community and not profit, and has a good relationship with the funeral homes that are coming from a long way away at times to be able to access service that is at this quality. I'm appreciative of the fact that we have these different options before us, and that there is one where we can continue to provide that service in what is currently, as Councillor Henry said, economically sustainable. And I really do look forward to your work, Ms. Coswin, and to see how far you can go with the province to help empower us to make a greener option for all people going forward.
Excellent. Well said. I'll call the question. All those in favor? It's all of us. Thank you, and thank you, team, for good work. It's not often the financial model and the highest level of service model meet up so well. So thank you, and thank you, Stuart, for your long drive down here. And Susan for your always your keen interest in this project. Next up. The informal public meetings. Item 13A. This is an informal public meeting to consider item 13A, zoning bylaw amendment Z1906, general amendments to zoning bylaw number 2018-050, part 2, citywide. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing these amendments for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position, and a staff report will be considered by Council during a formal public meeting at a future time. Anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anybody who wants further notice, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of Council chambers. The planner, Dominic Simpson, will now provide a brief overview of the proposed amendments. Welcome again, Dominic.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Jaworski and members of council. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Dominic Simpson. I'm here representing the Planning Division with the city. And I'll just be giving a brief overview of Part 2 of General Amendments to Zoning Bylaw 2018-050, and this is a citywide zoning bylaw amendment. Just for some background, as you're aware, Zoning Bylaw 2018-050 was approved by Council September 10th, 2018, so over a year now. It's still under appeal with the LPAT, but despite this, you'll remember I was here in June of 2019 to present Part 1 of the General Amendments, and I'm here today to present the Part 2 of that as well. The objective of Part 2 will be to correct, clarify, and further add provisions to the zoning bylaw that either weren't reflected in Part 1 of the General Amendments or additional amendments that staff have identified while working with the bylaw for over the past year now. The other main objective of these General Amendments will be to make our regulations more understandable, consistent, and relevant for staff and customer needs. Some of the key amendments that are being considered through this process are clarification of our deck provisions, adding provisions for mezzanines. We see this is a growing trend with new developments in the city, so we want to ensure there are sufficient regulations in place to guide this form of development. We'll also be looking at clarifying the definition of advanced tech, such as expanding the interpretation of medical technology businesses. We'll be looking at reviewing our servicing regulations, legislative updates, such as any impact Bill 108 will have to our zoning bylaw, and other minor amendments. In terms of next steps, we'll be circulating these general amendments with internal and external review agencies, taking any of that feedback or comments from these agencies and the public, and then we'll be coming back in front of council for a formal public meeting projecting in early January 2020. That's all for me. Welcome any questions from council.
Thank you, Dominic. Does any council have any questions for staff? Please remember this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members should not express opinions at this point. Yeah. Good. Seeing none, there are no registered delegations. If there are any questions? Oh, sorry. If there are no more delegations. Oh, what's that? I'm just about to. I had to skip forward to pass the stuff where it doesn't apply anymore. If there are no more delegations, oh wait, no. Are there any delegations who wish to speak to this tonight? No. Okay. If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Congratulations, Dominic. I think this is the first time you haven't got like a whole bunch of questions at the podium. You always come up and then we come up with something new. So congratulations, you made it through.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thanks. Item 13B. This is an informal public meeting to consider item 13B, official plan amendment number 27 and West Hill District Plan Amendment 1130814 Ontario Inc., the INCC Corp., Waterloo Commons JV Inc., Home Hardware Stores Limited. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future time. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anybody who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of council chambers. There is more than one registry, so make sure you sign the appropriate one. The planner, Wendy Fisher, will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, and the public here tonight. This informal public meeting is pertaining to Official Plan Amendment 27 and a proposed amendment to the West Hill District Plan. In 2018, MHBC Planning, on behalf of a number of private landowners, approached the city with a proposal to construct a collector road north of the boardwalk connecting Thorndale Drive roundabout to Herb Street West. A study was initiated based on the study area that's outlined in yellow before you. And that study area consists of about 16 hectares or 40 acres in total. And the land uses within the study area currently consist of a portion of the Region of Waterloo's landfill site, a portion of the Hydro 1 corridor, as well as a commercial plaza at the corner of Herb Street West and Ira Needles, a golf course, as well as former agricultural lands, environmental features, and stormwater management ponds. For context, the lands within the study area are designated in the city's official plan as open space, employment, and commercial. There are also a number of specific provision areas that apply to portions of these lands. In terms of zoning, the lands within the study area are zoned under zoning bylaw 1418 as a mix of agriculture and mixed-use commercial. Under bylaw 2018-050, the lands consist of or zoned future determination, parks and recreation, waste management, mixed-use neighborhood commercial. And there is a site-specific bylaw that was approved in 2019 that still remains applicable. It applies to lands right at the corner of Herb Street and Ira Needles Boulevard. And that specific bylaw speaks to specific regulations about land use, setbacks, and building floor area. So there are a number of things that we know coming into this project. The first is the fact that there is a northerly extension of the planned road network that is contemplated both in the West Hill District Plan as well as in the OP, specifically specific provision area 41 specifies that prior to any plan of subdivision or site plan application that road network needs to be appropriately accommodated and assessed. We also are aware of the fact that a draft plan of the integrated multimodal transportation study was brought forward earlier this year, and that study does identify the need for as well as the justification for a proposed collector road in this area. Specifically, it does specify between Herb Street and Thorndale Drive. We also know that a proposed collector road in the area is reflected in the city's development charges background study, as well as the approved 2019 capital budget. And finally, earlier this year, the Region of Waterloo approved the Herb Street West Class E environmental assessment. They are currently in the detailed design component of that study, with construction anticipated to begin in 2020. Staff recognize that there are efficiencies in moving forward with the collector road now and trying to align some of the efficiencies of the collector road or identifying that intersection in with the region's project. So in terms of this project, the applicant is proposing to advance it in two phases. The first phase is simply to identify the proposed collector road alignment and servicing strategy, and that would be brought forward by way of an official plan amendment and an amendment to the West Hill District Plan, simply by identifying the preferred road alignment on a schedule and a map, respectively, as well as bringing forward the servicing policies if and where applicable. The second phase of the project is simply implementation, or it's about creation of the road, and that, as well as the servicing strategy, and that would be done by way of one or more draft plans of subdivision, as well as future zoning bylaw amendments. So phase one of the study, which is really the purpose of the applications that we're bringing forward, The applicants were asked to provide us with an understanding of the existing conditions that are out there. In doing so, they have submitted a number of studies, including the existing conditions and planning reports, which includes evaluation criteria, a number of technical memos, and those technical memos range from covering stormwater management, surface water, hydrogeological functions, and the like. As well, they've completed a Stage 1 environmental impact assessment and transportation network assessment. So they've looked at all of this existing conditions out there, and they are proposing 3 collector road alternatives as well as a preliminary servicing strategy. In terms of the collector road alternatives, there are 3 primary alternatives that are proposed. Alternative A, which you can see in green before you, provides access to Herb Street by crossing through the Waterloo Commons lands and terminating generally at the existing signalized intersection that's adjacent to the Canadian Tire development lands, or specifically the around Shoppers Drug Mart, Bank of Montreal. Alternative B crosses through Hydro 1 corridor and would terminate at Herb Street at a new intersection or roundabout. And alternative C, which is shown here in purple, traverses across the Hydro 1 lands and as well as a portion of the Region of Waterloo's landfill over by their offices, and would terminate at the existing roundabout that is adjacent to the Costco site. I should also note that alternative A, they're also contemplating not just a signalized intersection, but a roundabout for that alternative as well. The applicant's consultant has specified servicing options for water and sanitary services, but there are 4 proposed alternatives to deal with the stormwater management options. And these options vary based on the number, the size, location, and ownership. So this just gives you a sense of what is before us. All of these options are certainly being reviewed at this moment. So in terms of where we're at now and our next steps, as I mentioned, the applicant has provided with a number of studies, and those studies have summarized the existing conditions. They provide us with some technical data as well as the evaluation method and criteria that is proposed to evaluate the alternatives. That's been reviewed, and they've come up with the 3 alternatives for the collector road as well as servicing options. And all of that information is being reviewed by both agencies and staff. Once we have got to the point where we find the information and the evaluation criteria acceptable, the applicant will then take that criteria and apply it to the alternatives to do an evaluation, eventually arriving at a preferred collector road and servicing strategy. Following that, we would be looking at some public input and agency review of the preferred alignment and servicing strategy, and then eventually coming back as part of a formal public meeting for council's consideration. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Wendy. Does any councillor have any questions for staff? Please remember this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked, notwithstanding the fact this has been talked about in the community for about 5 years. I remind you, you're seeing this for the first time. Council members should not express opinions at this point. I see Councillor Hanmer, Councillor Veith, Councillor Bonagor. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Thank you, Wendy, for the outline of where we're at with the process. That's helpful. As the Mayor has said, this has been talked about for numbers of years, so it is important to me that we have that opportunity to get public input. So how else will we be carrying that out? What other methods than the informal or the formal meeting?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Hamner. We are certainly going to be watching closely what kind of public interest is being expressed in this project. What we will be doing, I don't think I can say that with certainty that the public engagement strategy has been finalized, but we certainly would be looking to engage the public in some way, shape, or form in terms of providing them with an opportunity to view and comment on any final preferred road alignment options. So we will be posting all of our studies and including the preferred alignment on the city's website, and then beyond that, we will be finalizing the strategy.
Councillor Veith, then Bonnegar.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. Could you go back to that stormwater management pond slide there? That one. So say we pick alternative 3, does that mean there's going to be 6 new stormwater management ponds?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, there would be, yes, I think I do have some of the stormwater management ponds that are shown. So in that particular alternative, in 3, so you would see that there are 3 new ponds that would be proposed, the C being city ponds and the R being would represent the regional ponds. So it may consist of taking ponds that are existing and they would remain. It could be a combination of a brand new pond.
Councillor Bonnegar, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So thank you for the information. When you were talking about there being a multimodal study, so I realize that this road is essentially to ease congestion in what is becoming a very problematic part of the city, not helped by the fact that there's now a drive-through at the intersection. And yeah, I'm recognizing that the boardwalk is home to a fairly major transit hub already. Like there are 9 bus routes that stop there. But I mean, I'd like to know, as part of this study or just in general, are staff in discussions with the region to assess how this part of town, including the employment lands that the city's going to be developing, how that can be serviced, plans to be serviced through transit? And is transit being factored into this, or is it really just for cars?
Again, through you, Mayor Jaworski, to the best of my knowledge, and I certainly would look to staff to help answer that as well. But if the transportation road network is looking at future use of the roads to the year 2031. It does generally speak to cars, but it does factor in sort of transportation demand management measures, which may include both transit, it may include alternative modes of transportation as well. It's generally factored in, but to a lesser degree, it is really focusing on moving cars.
At what point in the discussion do we say, can we be like, do we ask for buses and other things to be, just to make it all transit ready, I suppose? Is that something that's already, is that what the multimodal study is doing? Is that on the radar?
I unfortunately, again, I don't have a lot of background with respect to the transportation, that particular study and what it has entailed. I'm wondering if Mr. Cotter might be able to provide a little bit of background.
Seems keen to answer this question. Welcome.
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Bonnegar. Typically when we're looking at these road projects, one of the things that we do is we look at the design of the roads to function for all types of modes of transportation. So with respect to the future employment lands, we're designing or looking at that subdivision design to accommodate GRT transit services. This road network, again, will look at through the subdivision and detailed design process how we accommodate transit and make sure that the road network is available to accommodate it, and then it's up to GRT to align the routes and ultimately determine the path of where the buses go to. But we certainly want to make sure that the road network is capable of handling all types of traffic, including bus traffic.
Councillor Bodley, Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, through Mayor Jaworski. A couple of questions. Maybe just the elephant here. Can somebody speak to maybe what is happening with the golf course that this road is being proposed to go through?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, the golf course is an interim use. As noted on one of the slides, it is currently held in ownership by home hardware stores. Nothing has been submitted to the city by way of a development application, but certainly the ownership might kind of suggest that it is slated for some, and it is slated for some form of development in the future.
It is currently under lease from Home Hardware. Is that what is the current arrangement, I guess?
To be honest with you, I don't know what the legal agreements that are in place for it. I do know that the golf course is simply an interim use in the meantime.
Perfect. Thank you. And then the second point, I guess, I'm echoing a little bit of what Councillor Hanmer had said. I know there is a lot of interest in this bypass road from residents in my community in Vista Hills, particularly how it sort of interacts with Platinum Drive when that gets built next year. As people from Vista Hills looking at potentially using Platinum Drive and then this bypass road to head sort of south towards the highway. So any opportunity or feedback around public engagement that may be able to include those in the Vista Hills community for whom I see this as an important piece, I would be very interested in hearing from that to try and connect with them. Thank you.
Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, and I see that Mr. Mallett's here from Paradigm, and he prepared the Waterloo West Side Transportation Network Assessment Study. What I'm trying to understand is, given that this is an environmental assessment, there has to be criteria by which the alternatives are being measured, and I'm trying to get an understanding of how, like, what that criteria is as it relates to the different road configurations. And what the priority is. So, for example, if the criteria was the preferred alternative would reduce traffic volumes through the roundabout by 50%, for example, the current roundabout on Erbsville Road, that could be a potential criteria for assessment. And so I'm having a hard time understanding, because the West Side Network Study, that's something we own, that's something we did, right? Isn't it? Or is that it? Okay, that's what I thought. And then within the zone change listing, I don't see one document that identifies which would be assessing the alternatives for the different road configuration. I see planning existing conditions, environmental impact study, which is birds and bees and count the trees. The technical memorandums don't seem to deal with my question. And then Herb Street, PONE, chronology, I'm not sure what that is, hydrological and surface water monitoring, technical design overview, maybe it could be in there. Municipal services and utilities coming soon. I'm thinking more that may or may not, because there's nothing, and then it says stormwater management alternatives considered. And so I guess I was expecting to see something that would be like transportation corridors, alternatives, consideration, and the ranked criteria. It's so, and one of the reasons why I'm struggling is because can you put the slide up again? Sorry, that shows the road alignment alternatives. So all of the three alternatives traverse through a roundabout at effectively West Hill Drive. And so what I'm trying to understand is, how much potential traffic would be managed within a roundabout at that designation. And it could very well be the right place to put it. I'm trying to get a sense of how much that traffic is going to divert off to the other destination, and whether putting another roundabout at West Hill is a good alternative versus running it through the Thorndale Drive roundabout at the boardwalk. I just don't know, and so I'm trying to get a sense of how that's being assessed.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I guess a couple of comments. The first is that what has been completed is more of an EA-like study. It's not actually an EA, so it is not following necessarily the procedure of a typical EA. Within the planning or existing conditions report is where the applicants have summarized the evaluation criteria that they plan to or wish to apply to the alternatives. And there are sections and considerations, and it does provide some sense of under transportation, they'd be looking to relieve the future road network and what those objectives might be. And these are things that staff are evaluating as part of our review to ensure that the city's interests are represented in that evaluation criteria. So we will be taking forward and looking exactly at what you're referring to. With respect to the collector road alternatives, there are 3 that are being considered, and really what's being determined is where along Herb Street are we going to be providing or creating that intersection. As for how it sweeps down and connects through to Thorndale as well as connecting to Ira Needles, I would anticipate that kind of level of detail would be determined at the draft plan of subdivision stage. But I certainly would speak to my colleagues who will be speaking after me, the applicant and potentially his consultants to confirm or add to that.
Thank you. And I do have a question that's probably for the applicant, but I'll ask you just in case. On alternative C, I see it sort of bisects the region's recycling facility. I'm just wondering, does the region know that? And if that's not for you, I'll take it to Dave when he's up.
No, the region is fully aware. They are circulated on the application, and we'll be providing formal comments on that particular alignment.
Good to keep your former colleagues up to date. Okay, yes. I see that's it. Thank you, Wendy. I will now ask any registered delegations to come forward. First, and the only registered delegation, is Dave Aston, Vice President, Partner, MHBC Planning. Welcome, Dave.
Oh, that's just one study. That's Jim's study. Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of committee. Excited to be here this evening and discuss the proposed amendment to the official plan and the West Hill District implementation plan. First, just want to thank Wendy for her presentation and just the great job she's been doing to coordinate this massive effort to put a line on a map. I mean, that's oversimplifying it, but the work that she's been doing to coordinate with the agencies and the work that's been submitted has been very helpful to getting us to this point. Here this evening with Jim Mallett, Paradigm Transportation, Jeff Martins, MT Engineering, Vince Varga from the Boardwalk, the INCC group, Paul Britton from our office, and I see Mr. Patterson here with regard to home hardware. So we have a good representation this evening to respond to any questions. And I don't intend to repeat a lot of what Ms. Fisher covered. She had a very thorough report and presentation. I just want to try and answer some of the questions that came up through the counselor questions as I worked through the presentation. So the purpose of the applications was covered off. At the end of the day, the intent is to have an updated official plan with a collector road identified through the West Hill District and a master servicing strategy that would include the preferred stormwater management, sanitary and water servicing approach for this area. Again, a lot of that in the West Hill District implementation plan has been planned in the past, and what we're doing is taking a look at updating that, but there has been a lot of planning done in the past back into the early 1990s when this study was, this area was first studied. Here's the study area. Ms. Fisher covered the background and really the work that our studies have been building on and referencing and addressing. These are some of the images from the reports. You can see the identification of the collector road and a proposed intersection at Herb Street West in the top left. That's from your draft study. And in the bottom is an image taken from the regional class environmental assessment, cropped, showing the potential future roundabout as that was identified through the regional class EA process. Some of the objectives of the study, and this is where I want to maybe reference some of the questions. What we're looking at is improving traffic flow and connections for West Waterloo, and I would suggest that includes, as some other slides, all modes of traffic flow, transit, vehicular, pedestrian, cycling, as an opportunity. And as we get into the design and consideration of design of the collector road, we certainly see the opportunity to provide for transit movements to link through the West Hill District to the hub at the boardwalk, as an example. Also, opportunity to provide cycling connections. There's something, this is something that's considered on the west side of Waterloo, how also to move cyclists through the area. So further design will address those details, but it's certainly, those are certainly criteria that we've been considering. Maintaining capacity on Iron Needles Boulevard, obviously reducing the traffic volumes through the existing roundabout, providing secondary vehicle connection to southbound traffic for emergency response vehicles. This is something that we see a further road on the West Hill District will address, providing improved road network, pedestrian cycling capacity, and then addressing the policies of the official plan identified specific to the area. When we're looking at the collector road alternatives, Ms. Fisher covered these off very well. A couple of things I want to point out. On the right-hand side of the slide, these are the general, I'll call themes or categories that we're looking at as it relates to evaluation criteria. Under each of these bullets are additional criteria that we'll be using to assess the different alternatives based on a numerical ranking approach to lead us to the preferred alternative. And just to clarify, the connection at West Hill in either of the blue or green scenarios is not intended as a roundabout. That's intended to be a restricted movement, a right in, right out, or similar approach there. It's not intended as a roundabout in that location. The official plan framework, this just provides the direct language from the official plan as it relates to that specific policy area, essentially identifying that the transportation network be determined through a study process. This is the current West Hill District Implementation Plan map. It was most recently updated with the boardwalk applications. And as you can see here in the yellow or the underlining, that's the current collector road identified in the West Hill District Plan with the connection to West Hill on Iron Needles Boulevard or opposite West Hill. And what we found is this doesn't resolve the objectives or the problems that are really to be solved or addressed in the West Hill area and West Waterloo. So this is why we're looking at the update to the West Hill District Implementation Plan as well as the official plan amendment. These are the background studies that have been identified. As mentioned, the planning and existing conditions report is where you'll find the detailed list of evaluation criteria and the methodology to be used to evaluate the alternatives to look to the preferred alternative. As far as the process and next steps, Ms. Fisher outlined this in her slides, and we'll be working through evaluation of the alignment alternatives, determining the preferred alternative, and then working with staff as it relates to a recommended alternative and amendment as it relates to the official plan and the West Hill District Plan. So in conclusion, the applications that are proposed are intended to address the official plan policy also address existing traffic issues associated with West Waterloo, and details associated with the road, design of the road, will be generally addressed as part of this process, but implemented through future applications. And that's all I have this evening. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Aston? Seeing none. I think you're good. Oh, no, good. We're good, Dave.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else present here tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Thank you very much, Wendy. Next up, C. This is a formal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendment Z 1805, 84 to 86 Hickory Street West, and 284 and 286 Albert Street, Lahome Limited. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of council chambers. There is more than one binder, so please make sure you're signing the appropriate one. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on October 10th, 2019, and mailed or emailed on October 8th, 2019, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on April 9th, 2018, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. The planner, Rita Zilek, will now give a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you very much, Mayor Jaworski. Members of council, ladies and gentlemen, this is a formal public meeting for 8486 Hickory Street West and 284-286 Albert Street. Zoning bylaw amendment Z 1805. The application was submitted by Lahome Limited, represented here tonight by Trevor Hawkins of MHPC Planning. The subject site is a 4-lot consolidation. It is located within the Northdale neighborhood on the north side of Hickory Street between Albert and Hemlock Street. One of the unique aspects of the site is that there is quite a significant grade change as one moves from the corner of Albert and Hickory down towards Hickory and Hemlock over here. This is a conceptual building perspective of the 6-story residential apartment buildings. The building will contain a mix of unit sizes, including 93 one-bedroom units, 16 two-bedroom units, and 6 three-bedroom units. This is a conceptual site plan of the proposed development. In total, there will be 115 units, 143 bedrooms. The development will also include 41 parking spaces and 36 bike parking spaces. Access to the site will be off of Hemlock Street over here, with 9 of the parking spaces located behind the building at grade, and a further 32 parking spaces will be located underneath the cantilevered portion of the building over here. In terms of the official plan, the subject site is located within Special Policy Area 45, which applies to all of Northdale. The site is designated low-density residential, which allows for a maximum height of 6 stories and a maximum density of 250 beds per hectare, and with density bonusing up to a maximum density of 600 beds per hectare, subject to council approval. In terms of zoning bylaw 1108, the subject site is zoned Holding Northdale Mixed Use 6, which permits apartment buildings and a maximum density of 250 beds per hectare. In terms of zoning bylaw 2018-50, also known as the new citywide zoning bylaw, the subject site is zone change application, or ZC, because this application was received and deemed complete prior to council's approval of the new zoning bylaw. The intent of the ZC zone is to ensure that the zoning regulations applicable to the lands on the day before the effective date of the bylaw continue to apply. The zoning bylaw amendment, as recommended by staff, is summarized on this slide. Staff is recommending to rezone the subject site within bylaw 1108 from HNMU6 to NMU6 with site-specific provisions, and to rezone the subject site within bylaw 2018-50 from ZC to RN6 with site-specific provisions. This table breaks down the site-specific zoning provisions as recommended by staff, shown in purple for you, while the NMU6 and the RN6 zoning requirements are shown in gray. Staff is recommending that the maximum neighborhood frontage setback along Hemlock Street be increased to 7 meters and from the maximum 6 meters currently permitted. And this is to allow a switchgear to be located at the corner of Hemlock and Hickory Street. The switchgear will allow for the burial of hydro along Hickory Street in the future. Staff is also recommending that the landscape open space of 20% at grade and a total landscape open space of 30%, including the rooftop garden, be permitted following suit with the permissions of the NMU6 zone. And that 0 loading spaces be required for the 6-story apartment building following suit with the requirements of the NMU6 zone. In addition, staff is recommending that the ground floor height, a ground floor height of 2.6 meters be permitted for 2 of the units facing Hickory Street, and a ground floor height of 3.55 meters be permitted for 2 additional units facing Hickory Street, provided that the reduced ground floor height is limited to 55% of each of the units' ground floor area. This is to accommodate the loft spaces within these units being proposed by the developer. And finally, staff is recommending that a density of 497 beds per hectare or an additional 72 bedrooms be permitted in exchange for community benefits. So in exchange for the additional 72 bedrooms on the subject site, staff is recommending that the applicant enter into a Section 37 bonusing agreement with the city and contribute a total of $891,000 toward 4 community initiatives. Staff recommend that the funds be distributed as follows. $100,000 should be contributed toward public art in Northdale parks and public spaces. $291,000 be allocated to the city's Affordable Housing Grant Program. $100,000 be allocated towards the implementation and development of the Northdale Community Hub. And finally, that $400,000 be allocated to the University Gateway Project to help implement design elements that will enhance the University Avenue streetscape. In conclusion, staff is recommending that Council approve zoning bylaw amendment Z1805 for 8486 Hickory Street and 284-286 Albert Street in accordance with Section 7 of the staff report. And that Council authorize the mayor and the clerk to sign the Section 37 agreement, which is contained in draft form in the back of the staff report. That concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Rita. I do have questions from Councillor Veith and Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair, or Mayor Jaworski. Thanks, Rita, for the report. Can you just explain what are loading spaces? Is that for Uber drivers and drop-off kind of things, or is that for move-in?
So in this instance, the requirement is in the new zoning bylaw for loading space for an apartment of this size, and it would be for moving in and out of the building, essentially. That would be the purpose of it. Is that your question? Yeah, that is the purpose of the space.
But there isn't any?
There isn't. I did mention in my report, if I could just go back to the site plan. I don't know if you can see it here, but there is some space in here which could accommodate a vehicle that is about 6 meters deep, so long. So there is some space that could potentially be used for drop-offs, pickups, things like that.
So, and my other question is about, so getting into the building is from Hemlock, right?
Yeah, there's entrances, there's two here, if you can see those two,
Okay.
on Albert, and there's other entrances along Hickory and Hemlock as well.
Okay, so we drive up and down Albert Street all the time, and there's always Ubers, cabs pulled over on Albert, and it's very tight to get. I always wondered why we couldn't have a pullover space, although most of those buildings along there that face Albert, there is the opportunity, you can go in to pick people up, but they stop right on the street, and sometimes it's pretty busy there on the weekend evenings. But anyway, I can see that if there's doors there coming out onto Albert Street, there will be people coming out waiting for rides and meeting, that kind of impeding traffic along there.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the comment. Councillor Bonnegar, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So I'm just wondering if a development like this, they're proposing to double the density, essentially. Yes. And when we're looking at bonusing, we have the option of asking for 40 to 60%. So how did we end up not at least asking for 50%?
That's a very good question. So essentially, the way I looked at it is 40% for me is a slight increase in bonusing requests, say. And then I see the other extreme, which is it could be bonusing of density and height, and also lots of amendments to change the site-specific provisions. When I looked at the site, the amendments that they're asking for are not major. I wouldn't say so. One of the amendments is to accommodate the hydro transformer here. The other one is to accommodate the lofts to make the building more function better, to allow for the lower ceiling heights along Hickory for a few of the units. And because the height is not increased, the massing of the building is essentially conforms to the zoning bylaw regulations. I'm of the opinion that 45% is the appropriate amount to ask for. But it's really up to council to make a decision as to what you think is appropriate, because it's in your hands at this point. This is just my recommendation, and it's based on the one extreme and the other, and then kind of meeting somewhere in the middle of that.
Because when I look at it, I mean, they could go maximum of 600. Is that like beds per hectare? Is that correct?
Well, they couldn't on this site unless they couldn't really. You cannot bonus height in Northdale. They are maxed out, I would say. They do have more parking than they need, but they just don't have any more height to play with.
When we get to discussions, I, for one, would be interested in finding out what that would look like at 50% with the additional going towards the Affordable Housing Grant Program, just flagging that to my fellow councillors. When it comes to bike parking spaces, given the predicted number of residents, 36 bike storage location, like storage for 36 bikes, seems woefully small. How did that number get reached?
Certainly. The requirement in the zoning bylaw is 0.25 bike parking spaces per bedroom. And that equals I believe it was 36 spaces. So they meet the requirements of the bylaw, essentially. That is the requirement of the bylaw.
But they're providing less parking. No, more. Oh, it's more parking. More parking and the minimum bike.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, the only other thing that I had flagged was the loading zone, both for people moving in and out, especially given the fact that some of the apartments are flagged as potentially converting to commercial at a later date. So was there a reason to not include a moving van / commercial loading zone, and to Councillor Veith's point, drop-off zones at the frontages of the building as opposed to all at the back.
Certainly. So just looking at the site plan, and again, seeing that there is space over here to potentially park a car temporarily, run in, get something, or drop somebody off, that would be one option. Another option that we could look at is there is surplus parking, and the size of the parking space required by the bylaw would be 3 meters by 6 meters. Whereas our required parking spaces for any of these spaces is 2.8 meters by 5.5 meters. We're almost there. So we could potentially just require through site plan that one of those additional parking spaces be identified as a loading space. Or if you wish, we could add that requirement through the site-specific bylaw and just in a reduced format, so 2.8 meters by 5.5 meters for a loading space, and use up one of the surplus parking spaces that they have.
And when it comes to the drop-off points near the resident entry, like is that something that the city would consider, or is that something that we don't do?
I'm not aware of anything like that. Now, I know Albert Street is being reviewed eventually in the future for, I don't know if anybody can address that, what the street would look like in that end of Albert Street, whether there's any drop-off locations or anything.
Oh, Mr. Rapp, or, yeah, Mr. Rapp.
Certainly through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Bonagor. The one thing we would want to do in considering this is work through our transportation group about the maintenance through the winter and the responsibility of maintaining that drop-off area. And whether that would be the property owner or ultimately a condominium corporation or the City of Waterloo. It's something that probably as we're intensifying, we should start perhaps developing a policy on that, taking that into consideration, and then let the development industry know of what the expectations are going forward. And I can speak with the directors of IPPW about trying to develop such a policy, or at least for consideration, and bring it forward to council.
That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Next up, Councillor Freeman, please.
Just since we're on this topic, I'd like us to be able to consider as part of your recommendations that a drop-off zone be internalized to the site. And the reason is because if we're focused on Vision Zero as a council, having anything that interrupts that vulnerable user space on major streets creates a real zone for conflict with pedestrians and cyclists. And I think that that's something that within the transportation master plan and the team I'd like to leave in your hands to look into. But I think more broadly, the comment about having a loading space is critically important. And I think it should be internalized to the site. And, my preference is to actually, we had so much problem with this on Columbia Street until they've put in the interim situation with the cycling, where it's finally stopped of cars randomly stopping in the no stopping zone. So I think there's importance to be very purposeful about this, and so if it requires an amendment down the way, I'd value your advice when we get to that point.
Thank you. And I just one question for me, and I think it's because I have maybe old memory of how we used to do things. On the density bonusing, if I recall, in last term of council, we kind of set the bar at like $10,000 per bedroom. And I notice here we have 72 extra bedrooms, so 72 times 10,000 would be 720,000. Did we change from that, or how did we get to the new calculation method? I'm just trying to refresh my memory on that, because I see we're certainly well above it now.
Certainly. So we have moved away from that, and we are now assessing the land value uplift of applications, bonusing applications. Yes. And there is a council-approved report that I followed for the process, and that's how I came up with the number. And the per-bed number, I believe, is 12,725 per bed.
I was probably busy chairing that night, Rita. I'm really paying attention to the chairing job. Thanks. I don't see any further questions. Oh, Councilor Freeman.
Sorry, as a follow-up to the mayor's question, is this the first application that's formally gone through that change where we're looking at residential uplift? Okay, it is.
Yes.
Okay, so I just...
Thank you, Councilor Freeman. That's why. I'll go with that. Okay, thank you, Rita. I'll now ask registered delegations to come forward. One registered delegation, Trevor Hawkins. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of council. I didn't have a presentation here this evening, but I'll speak in support of staff's recommendation and hoping I can address some of the questions that arose. Perhaps if I could steal from Rita's presentation, we could pull up the site plan. So the building does have eight visitor parking spaces, which would be easily accessible for Uber drivers. So if you're ordering an Uber, you would ask them to park in the visitor parking, which is right off Hemlock Street outside the building. So you could be picked up and dropped off in that location. We didn't design for curbside drop-off because to be fair, we've advanced that scenario in other projects, and it's met with resistance from staff for a number of good reasons and unique reasons. So we didn't really venture down that avenue in this scenario, feeling that the dedicated visitor parking would allow for that. In terms of the move-in space, there is a dedicated move-in room, and there is space underneath the building to physically park a move-in van and then use the move-in room to move into the building. The application and the bulk of the design of this project stems from almost a year probably before the bylaw was approved. So there was no loading space requirement back then. It's taken us, the informal public meeting was back in April of 2018, if council can recall. So it's taken us a long time to get here, but we have made allowance for people to move in and out of the building. There won't be vans parked on Hickory Street or Albert Street or Hemlock Street. It just doesn't necessarily meet the very specific measurements in the new zoning bylaw. And Rita was agreeable with recognizing the legacy part of the application, so that's why that was in there. In terms of the bike parking, there is a like all those 36 bike parking spaces are in a dedicated bike storage room underground in the building, and there are also lockers for all of the units. So you can either park your bike in your own locker, which is large enough to accommodate a bike plus many other goods, or you can use the dedicated bike storage room that we have just for bikes. So there will be more than 36 bike parking spaces sheltered within the building for anyone who wants to store their bike in a secure environment. With regard to the question about the bonusing, so we of course embarked on this application, and then partway through the process there were new guidelines brought in about uplift and 40 to 60%. So initially, we had, of course, approached with the understanding of $10,000 per bed, as you alluded to, Mayor Jaworski. We've shifted in discussions with Rita and recognized we did an appraisal. We've gone through the process that council's determined, and Rita has felt that 45% was the appropriate amount. And I would echo her comments about the nature of the application. It doesn't require setback relief. It doesn't require parking relief. It meets the height. The massing of the building isn't really changing. It's meeting all the bylaw regulations. It's the only relief really before council tonight is recognizing things that have changed from the old to the new zoning bylaw, the hydro switchgear at the corner, and then the very difficult design that we went through numerous iterations with Ms. Seelock because of the sloping nature of Hickory Street. The interior floor space of those units would have been 6.5 to 7.5 meters, and we felt an interior loft for part of that space was making more use of the unit, and it would still allow it if in the future someone wanted to convert it to commercial consistent with the bylaw, they could still do so. It wouldn't impede that possibility. So we felt that was Rita's recommendation was a fair assessment. It's more than $2,000 per bed higher than anyone else has paid in this part of Waterloo, so we felt it was more than fair and appropriate in this case, and we left it to Rita in her report and council tonight to determine how the funds were allocated. We had discussed with staff what projects they wanted the funds allocated towards, but how the money is distributed is certainly entirely up to council, and if more funds are desired for affordable housing, we are certainly more than happy to agree to that. Thank you, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, Trevor. Questions of the delegate? Seeing one, Councillor Bonagor.
Through you, Chair Jaworski, thank you for that extra information. You have answered many of my questions there. I'm just curious, and the design looks beautiful. I'm just curious, given the challenges of the slope, can you give me some idea of how you addressed accessibility to the building?
Sure. There is a barrier-free entrance at the corner. So the main entrance to the building is barrier-free. So that would allow you to access any unit within the building. There's elevators, and there are specific units that are designed as barrier-free accessible as well.
I'm just curious, are any of the units flagged as potentially to be used for affordable housing or to be offered at below market rates? Has that factored into the development at all?
Well, I think we often have this conversation. Certainly we've had it in Waterloo on many other projects. I think that in order to make these units affordable, and not just in this building, but in any other building, council and the community are going to have to start to wrestle with the notion of providing incentives to allow for those units. And the region's funding program, which allows you to, which is really different, that's subsidized housing as opposed to affordable housing, which is has a different threshold that you're trying to achieve. So other communities have looked at options to decrease development charges or decrease application fees. There are tools available that this council can consider to advance that. The grant program that we're contributing funds towards, that's obviously a great tool. I'm not sure what the parameters of that grant program are, but certainly if council wanted to put some structure around it and made that program available for a building like this or other buildings in Waterloo, I can't see why, if the economics worked, why anyone wouldn't pursue it.
But as it stands, it just didn't make sense to include it in this one. Is that correct?
I don't. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I don't think we've gone to the level of detail of pricing out of the units in this building. I think we offered smaller one-bedroom units, larger one-bedroom units, two-bedroom units, and three-bedroom units. So when you have a variety of units and unit sizes, you can offer varying price points. So if you're a family and a three-bedroom unit in this building is a certain price point and it's more affordable to you than a three-bedroom townhouse, that's achieving a goal. And if you wanted a smaller unit, you wanted a unit in a building, but you can't afford a 700 square foot unit, this building offers smaller units for people who don't want to pay the larger fee for a larger unit. So it's getting at the affordability through those avenues at this point in time.
More just offering different price points within the housing market there. That's the idea? So just expanding the offerings available.
Expanding the offerings available. I haven't ruled out, I think my answer was not ruling out the notion of affordable units in this building.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we've gone to the level of pricing out the units.
Okay. Yeah. And the only other thing is, I'm very glad to hear that you basically have something in mind for people who are moving in and out. That alleviates one of my concerns, so thank you. And when it comes to bike storage, the fact that people could use their storage rooms is good, but if you feel free to cram as much onto the side as you can, because I suspect people will use it.
I don't see any hands up right now, but I'll ask a question, and maybe it's of staff, but what determines the residential address of this building? I see it fronts 3 streets, yet the main entrance seems to be Hemlock. Will this have an address of Hemlock then? And I'm just wondering how that might, help with, calling a taxi and that you're giving your address as Hemlock, which is a cul-de-sac, isn't it? Cul-de-sac at that point?
Right. Mr. Cotter may expand on my answer, but generally the property owner would make a request for a specific address, and the city would review that in the context of 911 responses, so as not to confuse emergency services and evaluate it through that lens.
Mr. Cotter, anything further? To be determined?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to be determined. It's a process that's undertaken through our building department, looking at emergency response related matters, logical addressing for wayfinding, and in conjunction with Canada Post as well.
Okay, thank you. Further questions of the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much, Trevor. Is there anyone else present here tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. If there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Councillor Henry.
I have this motion. That's motion to approve application, whereas council has considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders, and whereas council has considered the professional opinions of planning staff. Therefore be it resolved, 1, that council approves staff report IPPW 2019-0055. 2, that council approves zoning bylaw amendment application Z-18-05 Lowhome Limited for 84 to 86 Hickory Street West and 284 to 286 Albert Street in accordance with section 7 recommendations of staff report IPPW 2019-055 for the reasons specified in section 6 conclusions of the report. 3, that council authorizes the mayor and clerk to sign the section 37 Planning Act agreement for Z-18-05 substantially in the form of the draft agreement contained in Appendix F to staff report IPPW 2019-055. I'm not sure that the staff could squeeze in any more references to the report number in there if they tried.
Excellent. Seconded by Councillor Freeman. Oh, well, we have to, somebody will second it. Councillor Veith to second it. Anything to say, Councillor Veith? No. I wasn't sure putting up a hand to speak to or not.
There seem to be questions, so I'll wait to make comments.
Question to Councillor Freeman.
Well, I just wondered within that recommendation, the notion of not agreeing to the 0 loading zone. That was my only question, that there be 1 loading zone, and I didn't know if that required an amendment to this motion, given that it wouldn't be listed in the recommendations, or at least I don't think it's listed in the recommendations. So I just had a question about that. And then there was also the comment about the Section 37 agreement and the bonusing amount, and so. I just had questions.
For clarity, I have moved the motion as is for the report as printed.
Right. So I would like to see an amendment that requires that a loading zone be internalized to the site and dedicated as a loading zone. Notwithstanding the fact there's visitor spots, I think that Rita made reference to a bit of a wider spot that would facilitate that kind of loading and unloading, and I think ways that we can make that better will actually help and maybe be more encouraging to using it that way. And she had a recommendation on using one of the visitor spots that's on grade outside, and that made sense to me. So that was the only thing. I'm not going to speak to the bonusing piece. It was raised by another councillor. Well, I'm actually asking staff if it requires an amendment. Yeah.
Certainly through Mayor Jaworski. To remove the loading, the relief from the loading would require an amendment to the recommendation in the zoning bylaw, but for referencing for the clerk and for council, if you wish to, it would be recommendation B2C on page 96 of 122 in the council package. And it would just be deleted, would be the simplest way for that amendment, if council wishes that.
Can you repeat that again, Cam? Council?
Certainly, it would be recommendation B2C, which is on page 96 of 122 in the council package. And it would just be delete that C. And I don't think we need to reorder alphabetically to keep the others in line.
Well, I'm happy to move as an amendment.
And Mr. Cotter has information as well, before we get too excited. Go ahead.
Through you,
Joel.
Mayor Jaworski, just for clarity, under the new zoning bylaw, there's actually 3 types of loading spaces. So council would be looking for a type A loading space here.
Okay. So I understand that's what you're moving to have.
So my recommendation would be that item 2A, on page 96,
2C.
2C would be, notwithstanding anything to contrary, one loading space, type A loading space shall be required.
Okay,
We could
and-
do it that way, right, Joel? We could reword it that way.
That's fine.
And I see Councillor Bonagor has seconded it. And I will ask a question of staff, or maybe Mr. Rapp has his microphone on. How practical is this? I guess it seems practical. Find out more.
I think it requires some, given there's extra parking spaces, it would require some additional site plan work. But it should be, I'm hoping it would be achievable. But if they only met their parking, it would be more difficult, but they are in excess of the parking requirement, which gives flexibility on the site.
Okay. So with that, I think we're good. Any comments from anyone before we vote on the amendment? Councilor Henry.
I'd comment that one of the values of the surplus in parking spaces is an identification of visitor spaces. The removal of a visitor space is a removal of a visitor space 365 days a year. The removal of a visitor space so that it can be a loading space is useful for those days 3 times a year circulated to student movement. And that's a reduction of visitor spaces about the other 340 days a year by 1. So I would flag that to council.
Which brings up a good question. So Joel, can you tell me what a type A loading space is? Like, what do I get for a type A loading space?
Through Mayor Jaworski, a type A loading space is a loading space with a width of 3 meters and a length of 7 meters and a vertical clearance of 3 meters. So it's slightly larger than a standard parking stall.
By 1 meter in length? Is that what you're suggesting?
By 1 meter in length and slightly wider in width. So it accommodates smaller vehicles, cube vans, smaller vans of that nature, like move-in type vans.
Okay. 3 minutes, I saw you had your hand up.
So I just had a question. I mean, Councillor Henry raises an incredibly valid point. Do we ever allow these loading spaces to be still a shared space? So it could be reserved on a particular day for loading, and then the balance of the time it functioned as a visitor parking spot?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, no, the zoning bylaw would require it to be dedicated as a loading space for loading purposes only. Ultimately, if it's left as a visitor space, it becomes the operations of the building to manage the tenancies coming and going. So if there are particular peak periods of the year when students are coming and going to this building, then it's an operational matter that spaces can be blocked off to allow easier flow of moving in and out.
New information. Go ahead.
I think that's really good information. That kind of makes me change my mind.
So this might be the first time we have somebody vote against their own motion.
I'm going to withdraw the motion from the perspective that I think people might still park there and load. So then I guess the next thing becomes, I think that Trevor raised a really valid point in terms of the address, in terms of directing things like Ubers on how to come. So I can leave that in your capable hands.
Okay. Further, I think we're there. Yeah. So the motions. Can we withdraw, or do we have to vote against it? Okay. So we're good. Okay. Councillor Bonnegar has another question. Go ahead.
And if I may speak regarding my idea that I raised before of readdressing the bonusing percentage, I'm not going to pursue that because given that this is our first time through the process, I'm going to let the process stand. If anyone else wishes to raise it, I'm happy to talk about it. But I think given this is our first time through, I'm happy to see it stand and see what we can learn from it.
And now, refreshing my memory, that is the first time through, seeing that we get an extra $171,000 for good projects in our community. I think that speaks well of the process. So, motion's on the table. I think we're all ready.
I'd be happy to speak to it for the first time.
See
I deferred for a question that became an amendment, so I'll learn about that in the future. Because I would have commented on loading spaces in my comment, so maybe we'd have whatever. Doesn't matter. So in terms of this proposal, Mr. Hawkins, you and your client, I appreciate the work you've done to respond to the concerns and comments that were made through the process. I know the project looked mostly the same but slightly taller before, and that was an issue to be worked through. But I think the building appears to have very good proportion and good scale. I think it will be an excellent addition to a very prominent corner in the neighborhood. So I think your client and architect can take good pride in that as it goes through. I appreciate as well the participation in our first go through of the density bonusing process. We don't have too many more before Doug Ford removes our ability to do good things in our community in this way, and while that's unfortunate, the contributions here will make a measurable difference in the lives of people in this neighborhood. We're working on park design right now across the street, and support for public art will help support us as we go to the public in the next couple of weeks with phase 2 of those designs. The Affordable Housing Grant Program, we do need to, I think, have a comprehensive conversation with staff about what that looks like. Mr. Hawkins has flagged he's not sure what our criteria are. That's because we aren't either. And that's because we know that there is work to do in concert with the inclusionary zoning process to deliver a complete and comprehensive and sensible package that understands our part of the spectrum and delivers that, and this is a tool to help us lubricate, I think, some of those aspects of the policy, which is helpful. The community hub project. Hey, we're still on the list. Doug Ford's occasionally funding schools again, so the school board is back at the table, talking to us about advancing that project, which is very helpful. And University Gateway, we've done a lot of media on, is going to need some money to make it hum in the way that we need it to. So I think this is productive as well. And I want to back up to the parking stalls and conversation of loading. In terms of what I see in my neighborhood, because this is not very far from me, so it's not just my ward, it's my neighborhood in many ways. When people move, they all move, or lots of them move. We need lots of spaces for that, and building management is important. I think for Commissioner Dykstra's group, now that the separated lane pilot is up around many of the periphery, we're going to have conversations around September and other move-ins, because what people have done with impunity before, they will not be able to do now. And I think we've got to figure out how to engage with all property owners to manage that kind of challenge in a much better way than we're seeing it in some aspects of the neighborhood. In terms of the drop-offs, this is going to be an ongoing challenge. I appreciate Mr. Rapp's note that there's a conversation that can be had internally in IPPW. It wasn't something that we significantly addressed through the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and is going to be an increasing challenge as technology changes and cars come who may not even have drivers to figure out all of these things. I don't think we're as well equipped as we want to be, but we can't do it ad hoc around this table and make it better. We've got to think about it in some large detail. But I think this is going to look good on that corner. And I reviewed our streetscape master plan for this area. There isn't on-street parking proposed on the Albert Street orientations for good reason, but Hickory there is. And there would be space even in the one-way configuration for folks to be able to lay by. And conveniently, those steps that you see on this map in the lower left, that's the main entrance to be able to get people in. And so that loads in a way that would be conducive to people to lay by in a place where they're allowed Whether people do things that they're allowed to is another matter that is a problem all over the city. So with that, appreciate all the work on this project and looking forward to it coming to this corner.
All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Rita, for your good work on this. Skipping down, I'll go all the way down to New Business Council. Seeing Councillor Freeman.
I would like to say that that the 80th anniversary for the House of Friendship was an amazing recognition of the role that they play in our community and their future vision around shelter-based care for a really important population in our community. And although I wasn't advised that I was there, I was there. And I think that the message is one that we can start thinking about as a city council, and what role as governors that we might play in that vision. I don't know if there's one, but certainly one of sharing the message.
Well, it certainly crossed my mind as well, and I know Councillor Bonagor was there, because we talk a lot here about affordability of housing, and we have our council contingency budget, which we've typically invested in affordable housing, and now there's new money in it. The reality is that the region of Waterloo, where I sit, despite the fact that we had millions of dollars available, of the 8 or the 5 firm projects that were proposed, not one is in Waterloo. And the one that is contemplated in Waterloo is simply a vision. So of all the people who are applying for money, not one are even from Waterloo. So maybe if we can't do something in affordable housing in the near term, maybe something on these healthcare and shelters or something like that. It crossed my mind. Just food for thought for General Council. Yes, go ahead.
And just for those that weren't at the House of Friendship, I apologize. So essentially what was unpacked was a future vision for care associated with homelessness, where they could receive emergent care within the confines of a shelter, and then instead of being discharged as they normally would be back to their address with no fixed address, they would actually be housed. And it just makes so much sense in terms of pressures on emergency beds, pressures in the hospital space, and the whole notion that patient-centered care really can better happen within a sheltered setting where those individuals feel valued and surrounded by peers. So,
Sheltercare.ca was their new website. Seeing no further items, I would like somebody to enact some bylaws. Councillor Freeman wants to. Councillor Handmer wants to. All those in favor? Motion to adjourn. Councillor Freeman, Councillor Bodley. All those in favor? We're adjourned.